Alright, everyone, it's time to talk about North Korea again. Their threats against Australia weren't enough to satiate them. So now they're saying, oh, well, in less than an hour we can sink these US carriers into the ocean with nuclear hellfire. And they also detained a US citizen, apparently a guest professor. Now, they actually have like an educational exchange program in Pyongyang with some Western and also Chinese individuals that teach courses, which I find a little bit surreal. I mean, you're like some U.S. Marxist professor. So you're like, oh, the commies over there, oh, the wonderful utopia. You go over, you probably get totally blindsided by what you see, but by then you're locked into like a contract. They say, we will throw you in the gulag if you try to leave early, maybe, or something. But they detain this U.S. Apparently guest professor that was teaching a course in North Korea, of all places. What a story to tell your grandkids, I guess. Meanwhile, they make these other threats. This comes on the tail of threatening Australia, as well as threatening South Korea and Japan, and making numerous threats against the U.S. Over the last few weeks. Can we be honest and say that things are coming a little bit unhinged? I mean, more than normal. It's fairly normal for North Korea to make the occasional threat regardless, whether it's a nuclear threat or not. They're like, oh, we're going to conduct this missile test. Haha, the West will burn. Or we nuke you. We attack Los Angeles or something, or Houston, like they have the ability. Or they parade some new weapons around and things like that. But in the past, it seemed like it was always in order to get the Chinese to send them, to trade more with them so that they would stop starving or something like that. Or it was just sort of their annual threats that they make around the US and South Korea conducting joint exercises. They've massively expanded their threatening ambitions, I guess, though. Australia, as far as I know, hasn't been on the list before. Malaysia, which was threatened about a month ago, was never on the list before. It typically stuck with South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. Now you've added half a dozen other states, apparently, to that list. This is not normal for North Korea. Now, does this mean an imminent struggle on the Korean Peninsula and, in all honesty, the fall of the Kim regime? Not necessarily. That could all just be ramped up threats, maybe showing off for the world. Maybe he's about to conduct another atomic test in North Korea, and he wants the world to be watching when he does. That's always a vague possibility. The US and China have both warned him not to do that. And then he also threatened to conduct weekly missile tests, which, I mean, he can conduct all the missile tests he wants. Who fucking cares? As long as he can't put atomic warheads on them, it's kind of a non-issue, honestly. The last missile, a lot of people were speculating that it failed. It blew up on the launch pad because the U.S. deployed some sort of weapon that was able to really fuck with the missile systems. If that's true, then we should be deploying that system, on the DMZ and the side of Japan and just have it perpetually there to throttle their ability to test their missiles, I guess, in a real-world situation. That'd be pretty funny. Get him really mad and really hot under the collar, see what happens. But it is relatively abnormal. And North Korea detains people from outside North Korea. It's done this before, not just with U.S. citizens. It's done this with South Koreans and the Japanese and Chinese and I think some Russians as well. They don't like to perturb Russia too much. I wonder why. Could it be they have less restraint in their response to such affairs than the U.S. does? Now, can you imagine? Can you imagine if North Korea talked to Russia and Russia's allies the way that it talks to the U.S. and our allies? What do you think would have happened to Kim Jong-un by now? What do you think would have happened to North Korea? Yeah, there would have been a little bit of an accident. Kim Jong-un would be taking a drive and all of a sudden he'd drive into a tree. Inexplicably, somebody has cut his brake lines. I wonder who's responsible. Yeah, we're the warmongers. We're like the bad guys. I get tired of both some people on the really far left. They like North Korea because they claim to be communists, as well as the libertarian side when people are like, oh yeah, but the US is imperialistic and aggressive and proxy wars and horrible things. This is all propaganda. Well, it's not propaganda. You can watch North Korea's state-run TV and get a good gauge of their technological aptitude and their style of life. Yeah, it's kind of backwards. Now, they have a right to do what they want, but the thing is, they don't have any rights under the Kim Jong-un regime. That's the point. That's why I don't have a problem with liberating them. And I do mean liberate. I don't mean march in, occupy, steal the minerals, ha ha ha. No, I would oppose that completely. Also, if they want to move to a Chinese style, sort of a mixed model economy, if China gets involved, they're still technically communist. If they want to march in and correct the Kim Jong-un regime and get rid of them and put a sort of quasi-representative one-party system in, one that's not going to go rogue, hey, so be it. Things will be way better for North Koreans. You look at China, even like the impoverished areas, people are more well off than some of the better off areas in North Korea. It's not like they only get one piece of dried meat every fucking year to eat, along with their normal staple of half a bowl of rice a day. That doesn't happen even in most of the more impoverished parts of China. Yeah, there's like the gutter oil, and there's like a lot of pollution and stuff, but you're going to get that anyway with industrialization. It's not pretty, it's not great. It's also been helped by the U.S. outsourcing all of its heavy labor, all of its heavy industry because of our environmental regulations and shit like that, and business tax rates that don't affect multinationals that move over to China where there are no regulations, or to India or something where the rivers occasionally catch fire, like they did back here in the 1960s and 1970s. It's a wonderful sight to behold. Out of sight, out of mind, I suppose. But Kim Jong-un's gone nuts. Not nuts in a one-dimensional way, but don't you think at some point you push some combination of the US, China, South Korea, Japan a little bit too far? If the Chinese get to the point where any sort of shielding of North Korea becomes diplomatically untenable, North Korea will fall anyway. Because the Chinese will line up their troops on the border, say, to hell with you. We don't care what happens to you anymore. We're not dealing with you because we've got to conduct diplomacy in the world. China cares at least somewhat about its reputation in the rest of the world. We've even seen a very, very vague scaling back of the human rights abuses that are over there, and some attempts at reform. It's like the pollution in China. They didn't care about it when it only affected their people. Once the wider world became aware of how bad the problem was, they started slapping solar panels on every fucking surface that they could. Because then it becomes a diplomatic problem. It becomes a problem of prestige and image. They don't want to be seen as sort of an ass backwards, massive, giant industrial muscle, but one that hasn't trickled down to the lower rungs of their own population. They care about reputation. Maintaining North Korea is bad for their reputation. This is why I think they don't care if they have a buffer state there anymore. China's probably, in the next decade, I would assume, they're not going to care at all. They already may not care. Trump, I believe yesterday, was talking with both the Chinese and the Japanese at the same time. On the North Korean issue, what do you think they discussed? Probably how best to handle the situation, because nobody wants North Korea to exist anymore. They want a reunified Korea, or they want the DPRK to move to a mixed Chinese model. Who cares? Whichever one, even under the mixed model of China, interventionist as it may be, prone to problems as it may be, abusive as it may sometimes be, still 10 times better than the model that North Korea uses. The people there would not be so desperately impoverished. There would be more employment opportunities. There would be certainly better agricultural practices. And hell, China doesn't have great agricultural practices itself. China gets some minerals, and North Korea, people can actually eat 3 square meals a day. Sounds like a decent trade-off. Oh, and they have at least a limited free speech. They can actually kind of criticize the government without instantly being shot in the head. It must be a massive change. In fact, I almost prefer the idea of the Chinese doing that. Because as a sort of stand-in between being under the total totalitarianism they are today and a Western-ish style like the ROK, full reunification, it may be such a cultural shock that you do need an intermediary sort of situation for a while between those two poles. Because the North Korean people's minds may snap, and they may not even know what to do with themselves. The idea of being able to freely move and be employed as you wish and travel the world and stuff, I think it might blow their minds a little too much. You may want them to be insular with China and just have sort of free movement regionally at first with a mixed model and slowly build up the economy. First expand the infrastructure and get people the food they need to not starve and then go from there. It might almost be preferable. And just think, if your way of life was totally overthrown, would you really be comfortable even if you were now free? You were liberated? Would you really be truly comfortable? And I think you'd be rather confused for a while. It might cause mass cultural breakdown. It may cause long-term consequences for the people of North Korea. It might honestly be better if they adopt a mixed model, something to stand in the gap there between their current level of slavery and then the coming liberation of Korea. But that liberation is inevitable. It is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. North Korea fires a shot at the wrong ship, all of a sudden war erupts. It's going to happen at some point. Since it's unavoidable, it makes no sense to wait until they launch a preemptive strike and flatten 1 million people in South Korea before we can launch any sort of sane response. No, we should attack them first and take out as much of their military assets near the DMZ as well as much of their air power as possible. Then let the ROK and or China get involved. Let them handle it. We will not be welcome in North Korea. If we start showing up, if U.S. troops show up in North Korea, everybody there is going to panic. They've been told since the time that they were born about all of these supposed atrocities that happened during the Korean War with American troops like pulling people's teeth out on a regular basis and gang raping people. They'll be terrified. Every single man, woman, and child will take up arms however they can. Yeah, you'd have like 5-year-olds fighting. Do you really want to fight that kind of war, or would you rather people from the region get involved that are seen with less hostility than we are, and hopefully that's not the response? Hopefully it's just the standard military doing the fighting, the civilians get out of the way, there aren't massacres, there aren't problems with this sort of thing. I think that would be preferable. Because if I was told for, 50 years, oh yeah, these people all long ago, they raped your grandmother and they pulled your grandfather's teeth out and then burned him alive, and they massacred this other village, and they were ripping people apart with chainsaws, and they were hanging thousands of people, and they came and they were just totally bloodthirsty, they're total savages. And then those people started showing up in my area. Yeah, you bet I'd be afraid? Probably. Yeah, I'd probably either fight or I'd just kill myself at that point. Yeah, it'd be too much stress. But if somebody else who I just see is a little backwards and a little out there and not quite culturally the same marches in, maybe I'm not quite as afraid and there's not a powder keg situation. That's about all. Peace out.